Russia is seeing the Arctic ice melt fast and filling that gap with a military buildup, some of it on North America's doorstep, not seen since the Cold War.
Russia is opening up a whole new route for world trading. Last year, the country announced the development of a $110 billion megaport on the northern Taimyr Peninsula, along with 7 airports, 15 villages, and the production of 40 plus new Arctic vessels, with the aim of running this operation as smoothly as possible. 500 years ago, the trading between the East and the West achieved a major breakthrough when Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese navigator, managed to cross the now known as Cape of Good Hope. This sea route to India allowed the Portuguese to drop the time to reach the East to 316 days. Then, in 1859, the Egyptians, with the help of the French, unveiled a much faster route for modern ships to travel halfway across the world. They dig a 100-mile-long water passageway which connected the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, making the travel time drop to just 48 days. But what happens when the Suez Canal gets compromised, as we've seen happen recently? Do we go back to sailing through South Africa like in old days? Does the world trading stop for an indefinite amount of time? Well, Putin has an answer for this. With global warming melting the ice caps and reducing the thickness of the ice created each winter, it is now, unfortunately, possible to go from China to Europe via the Arctic. This was demonstrated in 2017 by a Russian oil tanker that traveled across the Arctic in just 19 days, without even the need for an icebreaker. This was unthinkable just a few decades ago, but the truth is that the world's biggest economies are definitely taking advantage of this for their own good, ignoring what this means for the state of our precious planet. Russia is moving as fast as it can to claim control of this opportunity. It is currently building a massive $110 billion megaport on the Taimyr Peninsula, a region so remote that Rosneft, a giant state-owned oil company, is set out to build new highways, 2 airports, 15 villages, and several electricity plants just to get construction started, and eventually house 400,000 workers that are needed to make it all happen. The port is expected to grow the country's GDP at least by 2% each year, helping reduce the time and cost of shipping goods between Europe and Asia by as much as 35%. And the country is so serious about its efforts on the commercialization of the Arctic that it even proclaimed the city of Murmansk the new free trade capital of the Russian Arctic, and offers a university course in Arctic logistics and economics. Just look at this map. It is clear that if everything goes to plan, Russia will have the monopoly of world trading, and maybe even once again dispute the title of world power with the US and China. Speaking of China, you already know that Xi Jinping, aka Putin's best friend, was going to get a hand on this project. China, together with its neighbor India, South Korea, and the Russian government, will pour a colossal investment totaling $300 billion into new Russian infrastructures. With the help of the oil giants Vostok Oil, this money will be used to build 800 kilometers of new pipelines to supply Europe's need for oil and gas, a 12,000-kilometer long internet cable running from the rural village of Teryberka to Vladivostok, 15 new towns, and as well as upgrading 2 and building 5 whole new airports in the seemingly boring ice desert of Siberia. But is all this interest being directed solely on the construction of a few ports and icebreakers? Why is it that all of a sudden it's being invested the amount of whole country's GDP in the north of Russia? Well, you might have spotted the reason a few sentences ago. In January, with the COVID-19 outbreak still in its infancy and oil prices relatively stable, Russian President Vladimir Putin bullishly announced $300 billion of incentives for new oil and gas projects north of the Arctic Circle.
First and foremost, these resources are enormous. They have a planetary significance. In terms of forecast deposits, Arctic is home to around 13 billion tons of oil and 95 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. These are colossal deposits of planetary proportions. Yes, there are sanctions, there are some restrictions, they are deleterious, and yet these restrictions cannot stop us from this process, from exploring the Arctic.
This plan aims to further increase Russia's influence in the region, thought to be home to as much as $35 trillion. Yeah, you heard it right. $35 trillion worth of untapped oil and gas reserves. Underneath all that ice is a fortune never before seen in human history, and the order is to extract as much as you can from the country's top energy legislator. If the studies are correct, which, let's be honest, they at least have to be somewhat true, the investment being put in right now will be more than paid off in a few years. But there's a catch. The world is moving towards renewable energy, and soon the demand for oil and gas will irreversibly start dropping. In fact, some experts say it already passed the inflection point when in 2019 Russia reached production of 560 million tons of oil, its highest ever, and the energy minister Pavel Zavalny stated that demand might stay flat until 2040, but after that there's no turning back, so Russia must do what it can to keep up production. In 2018, China declared it would cooperate with Russia on an Arctic Silk Road, agreeing to invest in the region by building several Chinese docks across Russia's north ports that are currently underdeveloped and unable to handle massive volumes of shipping. And of course, China will also develop a modern railway system, including a 500-kilometer line to link Perm in the Ural Mountains with several northern port cities and to ease the transportation of resources into the country. Even Japan is taking interest in the Arctic. Tokyo just announced that it too will be building a $295 million ship which will enable full-year observation of climate change effects in the Arctic. Expected to set sail in April of 2026, this nuclear-powered ship that was converted to diesel will be able to accommodate a crew of 99 for 50 days. Together with the assistance of research icebreaker ships from Canada and Germany, Mirai, the Japanese research vessel, would allow Japan to conduct its own missions in the winter and accommodate scientists from other countries to further understand the effects of climate change in the most remote region of the world. But I gotta say, this isn't the most impressive machine coming out from this multi-billion-dollar project. That prize has to go to Russia's floating nuclear power station. This behemoth will sail 5,000 kilometers from the Arctic port of Murmansk to Chukotka in the Far East, with the objective to boost the power supply to remote areas, such as the Shanbilibin mining complex in Chukotka, which includes gold mines, or to supply electricity to offshore oil rigs in Russia's Arctic. Critics, including Greenpeace, point to previous Russian and Soviet nuclear accidents and warn that the use of these nuclear-powered ships increases the risk of polluting the Arctic, a remote, sparsely populated region with no big cleanup facilities. This report came out just 2 weeks after a nuclear-powered engine blew up on a Russian naval test range in the Arctic, killing 5 nuclear engineers and releasing radiation. The floating power station's highly radioactive spent fuel will be stored on board. Another idea to make use of these engineering feats is to hook it up to a desalination plant to produce fresh water or power whole neighborhoods of workers in Arctic's most remote islands. At least 8 of them will be manufactured, which together with 16 rescue and support ships and another 16 Arctic transport vessels will control and maintain the entirety of the Polar Silk Road. This whole plan, although impressive, is not sustainable. Russia signed the Paris Agreement to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2060, and other countries did the same, meaning that the demand for non-renewable resources is doomed to decrease over the years, making this a race against time. Let's just hope we don't run out of time to save our planet instead. Hope you enjoyed this video, drop a like if you liked it, subs if you loved it, and thanks for watching it. Obrigado.